Captain Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the Academy of Worlds grow larger on the main screen. The massive station looked like a floating city made of glass and metal. It spun slowly in the darkness of space, surrounded by the light of distant stars. Jake had been making supply runs to the Academy for 2 years now, and the sight still amazed him. "Coming up on Docking Bay 7, said Lisa Park from her seat at the navigation console. She was a young woman with short black hair and quick hands that danced across the control panel. "They're giving us the usual greeting, nothing special." Tony Rodriguez looked up from his engineering station. He was a stocky man with grease under his fingernails and a smile that came easy. "All systems running smooth, Captain. The cargo bay is ready for unloading." Jake nodded and opened the communication channel. "Academy Control. This is the transport vessel New Dawn requesting permission to dock." A cold voice answered him. It sounded like metal scraping against stone. "New Dawn, you are cleared for Docking Bay 7. Maintain standard approach speed. Do not deviate from your assigned course." The voice belonged to one of the Veltar, a species that looked like walking crystals. They ran most of the Academy's day-to-day operations. Jake had never liked dealing with them, but they were efficient, and that was what mattered. The Academy of Worlds was the most important school in the galaxy. Students came from dozens of different species to study advanced science, military strategy, and diplomacy. The Academy had been operating for 300 years without any major problems. It floated in neutral space, far from any single world or empire. This was supposed to make it safe for everyone. Jake guided his ship into the docking bay. The New Dawn was not a beautiful ship, but it was reliable. It looked like any other cargo vessel that might carry supplies between the stars. Most people who saw it would think it was just another working ship trying to make an honest living. They would be wrong about that, but Jake was not ready to tell anyone the truth yet. The Academy was huge inside. Corridors stretched for miles, in every direction. Students from different worlds walked together, talking in dozens of languages. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that Jake could not tell which end was their head. But they all came here to learn. Most of the students were from the major powers in the galaxy. The Kethvar Empire sent their best young warriors. They looked like giant lizards with sharp teeth and scales that changed color when they got angry. The Zephyrian Collective sent their smartest drones. They looked like insects that had learned to walk on 2 legs and wear clothes. The Veltar Confederacy sent their brightest crystals, beings made of living stone that could think faster than most organic brains. Humans were different. Earth was still considered a minor world by galactic standards. Only 12 human students attended the Academy. They had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to prove they belonged there. Jake felt sorry for them sometimes. Being the odd ones out was never easy. After the cargo was unloaded, Jake walked through the Academy corridors. He liked to stretch his legs and see how the human students were doing. Today he found them in the main dining hall, sitting together, at a table in the corner. They always sat together. No one else would sit with them. Amy Carter looked up when Jake approached. She was a senior student, maybe 25 years old, with red hair and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. "Captain Sullivan," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "How are things back on Earth?" "Same as always," Jake replied. "Your families all send their love. How are your studies going?" Ben Davis answered for the group. He was Amy's closest friend, a quiet young man who studied alien languages. "We're doing fine, Captain. Just fine." Jake could tell they were not fine, but he did not push. These students had their own problems to deal with. His job was just to bring them supplies and news from home. As Jake walked back toward his ship, he passed a group of Kethvar students. They were standing around a holographic display looking at star charts and talking in their hissing language. One of them, a particularly large specimen with dark red scales, noticed Jake watching. "Human," the Kethvar said in accented English. "Your species still sends supply ships to feed your weak offspring. How amusing." Jake kept walking. He had learned long ago that getting into arguments with alien students was not worth the trouble, but he made a note to remember the Kethvar's face, just in case. The next morning, Jake was preparing to leave when his communication system buzzed with an urgent message. The transmission came from the Academy's main administrative center. Jake accepted the call and found himself looking at Administrator Zexhari, the Veltar who ran the Academy. Zexhari looked like a living statue made of blue-white crystal. When he spoke, his voice echoed like sounds bouncing around inside a cave. Captain Sullivan, I must inform you of new security measures that will affect your future visits to this academy. Jake frowned. What kind of security measures? The Academy's governing board has voted to implement a complete ban on human vessels approaching within 50 light-years of this station. This ban will take effect immediately. What? Jake could not hide his surprise. Why would you do that? Recent intelligence suggests that humanity is building up military forces in the Outer Rim sectors. The board believes this poses a potential threat to the Academy's neutrality. Therefore, all human vessels are now prohibited from approaching this station. Jake stared at the crystal being on his screen. And what about the human students? How are they supposed to get supplies from home? Alternative arrangements will be made, Zexhari said without emotion. The decision is final. You have 4 hours to complete your current business and depart. The transmission ended, leaving Jake staring at a blank screen. Lisa and Tony had heard the entire conversation. They looked at him with questions in their eyes. Captain, Lisa said slowly, this is going to isolate those kids completely. Tony nodded. 50 light-years is a big distance. We won't even be able to monitor communications from that far out. Jake stared out the window at the Academy. Somewhere inside that massive station, 12 young humans had just been cut off from their home world. They did not even know it yet. When they found out, Jake wondered how the other students would react. He had a bad feeling that it would not be good news for the humans. The news about the human vessel ban spread through the Academy of Worlds like fire through dry grass. By evening, every student in the massive station knew that human ships could no longer come within 50 light-years of their school. The reaction was not what Amy Carter had hoped for. She sat in the dining hall with the other 11 human students trying to eat her meal, while alien students at nearby tables whispered and pointed. Some were not even trying to hide their amusement. A group of Kethvar students at the next table kept making hissing sounds that Amy knew were their version of laughter. Look at the humans, one of them said in heavily accented English. Their own kind cannot even visit them now? How pathetic. Ben Davis put down his fork and stared at his plate. Maybe we should eat in our rooms from now on, he said quietly. No, Amy replied firmly. We have as much right to be here as anyone else. We're not going to hide. But it was getting harder to stay strong. Over the past week, the mockery had gotten worse every single day. It started small. Alien students would make comments under their breath when humans walked past. Then it became more open. Now they were being laughed at in public. The worst part was the classes. Amy sat in advanced xenobiology, trying to concentrate on Professor Vexran's lecture about planetary ecosystems. The professor was a Veltar, one of the crystal beings that seemed to think they were smarter than everyone else. Today we will discuss the development of intelligent life on primitive worlds, Professor Vexran announced. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Some species take millions of years to develop basic space travel. Others remain stuck in violent tribal behavior, even after they reach the stars. Several alien students turned to look at the human section of the classroom. Amy felt her face turn red, but she kept taking notes. Sektor, the large Kethvar student who seemed to lead the anti-human group, raised his clawed hand. Professor, is it true that some species are naturally more aggressive than others? And that this makes them dangerous to peaceful civilizations? Professor Vexran's crystalline head turned toward the humans. That is an excellent question, Sektor. Research shows that species with violent evolutionary backgrounds often struggle to adapt to civilized galactic society. They may pose risks to more advanced cultures. Amy's pen snapped in her hand. She had been gripping it too tightly. Ben, sitting next to her, put a gentle hand on her arm to keep her from standing up. After class, the harassment continued in the hallways. Buzik, A Zephyrian student whose insect-like features made Amy's skin crawl, clicked his mandibles as the humans walked past. "Poor little humans," Buzzik said to his friends, making sure his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. Cut, off from their homeworld. Maybe they should go back to their mud planet before they embarrass themselves further. "I heard human ships are made of scrap metal and hope," added another Zephyrian. "No wonder the Academy banned them. They probably leak radiation and smell like burnt fuel." Amy stopped walking. She turned to face Buzzik, her green eyes blazing with anger. "Our ships work just fine, thank you very much, and Earth is not a mud planet." Buzzik's compound eyes glittered with amusement. "Oh, the human speaks. Tell me, little human, when was the last time your species contributed anything meaningful to galactic civilization? Your technology is crude. Your culture is violent. Your very presence here lowers the standards of this academy." Other alien students had stopped to watch the confrontation. Amy could see them forming a circle around her and Buzzik. Some had their personal recording devices out, probably planning to share the humiliation across the Academy's social networks. "We've contributed plenty," Amy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Human medical research has saved lives across dozens of worlds. Our agricultural techniques have ended famines. Your military buildup threatens the peace of this sector," Sector interrupted, pushing through the crowd. The big Kethvar loomed over Amy, his red scales darkening with excitement. "That is why your primitive warships are banned from approaching civilized space." "We don't have warships," Ben said, stepping up beside Amy. "Captain Sullivan's ship is a cargo transport. It brings us supplies and letters from home." Sector's laugh sounded like steam escaping from a boiler. "A cargo transport, how fitting. Humans are only good for carrying supplies for their betters." The crowd of alien students laughed along with him. Amy felt her cheeks burning with shame and anger. She wanted to hit something, preferably Sector's smug reptilian face, but she knew that would only make things worse. "Come on," Ben whispered, taking her arm. "Let's go." They pushed through the crowd of laughing aliens and walked quickly toward the human dormitory section. Behind them, Amy could hear Sector addressing the crowd. "Perhaps the Academy should consider whether humans have sufficient intelligence for advanced education," the Kethvar said. "They seem better suited for manual labor than academic pursuit." More laughter followed them down the corridor. Amy's hands were shaking with rage by the time they reached the safety of Ben's room. "This is getting out of control," Ben said, closing the door behind them. "Every day it gets worse. Soon they'll be throwing things at us in the hallways." Amy paced back and forth across the small room. "We have to report this to the administration. There are rules against harassment." "We've tried that already," Ben reminded her. "Administrator Zex Hari said we need to develop thicker skin if we want to succeed in galactic society." Amy stopped pacing. "Then we try again. We document everything. We record their harassment. We make it impossible for the administration to ignore us." But even as she said it, Amy knew it would not work. The Academy's administration was made up entirely of non-human species. They had already made it clear that they saw humans as a problem to be managed, not students to be protected. That night, Amy lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. Through her small window, she could see the stars. Somewhere out there, 50 light years away, Captain Sullivan was probably wondering how the human students were doing. Amy wished she could send him a message. She wanted to tell him that they needed help. But the Academy's communication system was controlled by the administration. Human students were only allowed to send approved messages during scheduled communication periods, and those periods were getting shorter and less frequent every week. Amy closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring more classes, more harassment, and more humiliation. But she would not give up. She would not let the alien students drive her away from her education. Even if it felt like the whole galaxy was against them, Amy Carter was not going to quit. Not yet. But deep down, she was starting to wonder how much more they could take. The isolation was getting to all of them. Without contact from home, without supplies from Earth, and without any support from the Academy administration, the human students were truly alone. and their alien classmates seemed determined to make sure they knew it. 3 months had passed since the human vessel ban began. Amy Carter sat in the diplomatic simulation laboratory, watching as her worst nightmare played out on the holographic display in front of her. The alien students had designed a simulation that made her stomach turn. The simulation showed a human colony world called New Terra. Virtual human families were going about their daily lives, children playing in parks, adults working in fields, elderly people sitting on porches. It looked peaceful and happy. Then the simulation changed. HFY warships appeared in the sky above the colony. The ships were massive and dark, covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Sector stood at the control panel, his red scales bright with excitement. "Attention, primitive humans," Sector announced in the simulation, speaking as the HFY fleet commander. "Your species has become a threat to galactic peace. For the safety of all civilized worlds, you will be cleansed from this planet." The virtual weapons fired. Bright beams of light struck the human colony from orbit. Buildings exploded into flames. The virtual humans ran screaming through the streets, trying to find shelter that did not exist. Children cried for their parents. Parents died trying to protect their families. Buzzik and the other alien students cheered as the simulation played out. They clapped their hands and clicked their mandibles with joy as thousands of virtual humans were vaporized. The simulation ended with the colony world reduced to smoking ruins. "Excellent work," Professor Vexran said from his position at the front of the classroom. "This simulation demonstrates the efficient removal of a problematic species. Very realistic. Tactical planning." Amy felt sick. Her hands were shaking and her face had gone completely white. Next to her, Ben Davis looked like he might throw up. The other human students in the class sat in stunned silence. "Professor," Amy said, standing up on shaky legs, "this simulation shows the genocide of my species. How is this appropriate for a diplomatic studies class?" Professor Vexran's crystalline head turned toward her. His voice showed no emotion at all. "This is a tactical simulation, Miss Carter. We study all possible scenarios in this class, including the removal of threats to galactic stability. But we're not threats," Ben said, also standing up. "We're students. We're here to learn just like everyone else," Sector hissed with laughter. "You are here because your primitive government begged for a few spots at our academy, but your species proves every day that you do not belong among civilized beings." The other alien students nodded and made sounds of agreement. Amy looked around the classroom and saw nothing but hostile faces staring back at her. Even the students who had never actively harassed humans before seemed to agree with Sector. "That's enough," Amy said, her voice getting stronger. "I'm reporting this to Administrator Zexhari. This goes beyond normal academic exercises." "Report all you wish," Professor Vexran replied. The simulation was approved by the Academy's Academic Council. Perhaps humans lack the emotional maturity required for advanced diplomatic studies. Amy grabbed her books and walked out of the classroom. Ben and the other human students followed her. Behind them, they could hear the alien students laughing and discussing how realistic the simulation had looked. That evening, Amy marched into Administrator Zexahari's office. The crystal being was working at his desk, manipulating holographic documents with precise movements of his faceted hands. "Administrator," Amy said without waiting for permission to speak, "I need to file a formal complaint about today's diplomatic simulation class." Zexhari did not look up from his work. "Ah, Miss Carter. I heard about your disruption of Professor Vexaron's class. Such outbursts are unbecoming of an academy student." "They showed a simulation of human genocide," Amy said, her voice rising. "They cheered while watching virtual human families being murdered. How is that educational?" "The simulation explored theoretical scenarios for dealing with aggressive species," Zexhari replied calmly. "Such exercises help students understand the consequences of militaristic behavior." Amy stared at the administrator in disbelief. "So you're saying it's okay to fantasize about killing humans because you think we're too aggressive?" "I am saying that your species' recent military buildup justifies certain precautionary measures," Zexhari said, "including academic exercises that prepare students for various contingencies." Amy left the administrator's office feeling more alone than ever. The academy's leadership was not going to help. If anything, they seemed to encourage the harassment. 2 nights later, Ben Davis made a decision that changed everything. He could not sleep, worried about his family back on Earth. He missed his little sister's birthday messages and his father's jokes about academy food. The isolation was driving him crazy. Ben snuck out of his dormitory and made his way to the academy's emergency communications center. The room was supposed to be used only for real emergencies, but Ben figured this qualified. He needed to hear a friendly voice from home. He activated the long-range communication array and tried to establish contact with Earth. The equipment was old and took several minutes to establish a connection across 50 light-years of space. "Hello?" Ben whispered into the microphone. "This is Ben Davis at the Academy of Worlds. Can anyone hear me?" Static filled the speakers for long moments. Then a familiar voice came through the interference. "Ben? Is that you, son?" It was his father. Ben felt tears running down his face just hearing that beloved voice. "Dad, it's so good to hear from you. Things here are really bad. The other students hate us and the administration won't help and..." The communication room door burst open. Sector and 3 other HFY students stood in the doorway, their eyes glowing with anger in the dim light. "Spy," Sector hissed. "The human is trying to send intelligence reports to his military handlers." "I'm just talking to my father," Ben said, backing away from the communication console. "Lies," another HFY snarled. "Human ships are banned from this sector because of military buildup. Now we find you trying to send secret messages. You are a spy." Ben tried to run, but the HFY students blocked his path. Sector grabbed Ben's arm with one powerful claw and twisted it behind his back. Ben cried out in pain. "You will tell us what military information you were trying to transmit," Sector demanded. "I wasn't transmitting anything," Ben gasped. "I just wanted to talk to my family." Sector's other claw struck Ben across the face, leaving bloody scratches on his cheek. "Do not lie to us, human. We know what your species is planning." The beating continued for several minutes. The HFY students took turns hitting Ben while demanding information about human military plans that did not exist. By the time they were finished, Ben was unconscious on the floor, blood running from his nose and mouth. The next morning, Amy found Ben in the Academy Medical Center. His face was swollen and bruised, and his left arm was in a cast. The medical droid treating him explained that Ben had several broken ribs and a concussion. "They said I was spying," Ben whispered to Amy when she sat down beside his bed. "They said I was sending military information to Earth." Amy felt rage building inside her chest like a fire. "Did you report this to security?" Ben nodded carefully, trying not to move his injured head too much. "Security said they're investigating, but they also said I shouldn't have been in the communication center without permission." That afternoon, Administrator Zexhari called Amy to his office again. This time his manner was even colder than before. "Miss Carter, your friend Mr. Davis was found guilty of attempting unauthorized communication with potential military contacts," the administrator said. "He will be placed in disciplinary isolation pending further investigation." "He was calling his father," Amy protested. "His father is a farmer, not a military officer." "The Academy cannot take such risks," Zexhari replied. "Given the current security situation regarding human military activities, all unauthorized communications must be treated as potential espionage." Amy stared at the crystal, being in shock. "You're punishing Ben for being beaten up by other students?" "Mr. Davis violated Academy regulations. The consequences of his actions, including any physical altercations that resulted, are his own responsibility." Amy left the administrator's office knowing that the Academy would never protect human students. They were truly on their own now. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she remembered Captain Sullivan and his crew. They had seemed like good people who cared about the human students. Amy wondered if there was any way to get a message to them. She had a feeling that Captain Sullivan might be very interested to know what was happening at the Academy of Worlds. But 50 light-years was a very long distance. and Amy was beginning to think that distance might be the only thing keeping the human students alive. Captain Jake Sullivan stood in his quarters aboard the New Dawn, staring at the communication screen with growing anger. The intercepted transmission showed Ben Davis being dragged away by Kethvar security students while blood ran down his face. Tony Rodriguez had been monitoring Academy communications for weeks, and what they had discovered made Jake's blood boil. "Show me the rest," Jake said through gritted teeth. Tony's fingers moved across his control panel. "Here's the recording, from the diplomatic simulation class. Warning, Captain, this is hard to watch." The holographic display showed the mock genocide of human colonists. Jake watched alien students cheer as virtual human families were murdered from orbit. His hands clenched into fists as Sector and the others celebrated the destruction of his species. "Those bastards," Lisa Park whispered from her position at the navigation console. She had been monitoring communication channels while Tony worked on his intercepts. How can the Academy allow this? Jake's jaw tightened as he watched the simulation end with smoking ruins where a human colony had been. Because they don't see us as equals. To them, we're just primitives who got lucky enough to reach the stars. Tony brought up another file. "It gets worse, Captain. I've been analyzing the Academy's internal communications for the past month. Several alien species are using the Academy as a meeting place to plan military operations." "What kind of operations?" Jake asked. "Coordinated strikes against human shipping lanes, blockades of Earth's trade routes. Some of them are even discussing orbital bombardment of human colonies." Tony's voice was grim. "They're using the Academy's neutral status as cover for planning a war against humanity." Jake felt cold rage settling in his chest. The Academy was supposed to be neutral ground, a place of learning and peace. Instead, it had become a staging ground for genocide, and 12 young humans were trapped inside, being tortured and humiliated, while their tormentors planned the destruction of their entire species. "I need to contact Earth Command," Jake said. "They have to know what's happening here." 20 minutes later, Jake found himself looking at the weathered face of Rear Admiral Paul Martinez on his communication screen. Martinez was a good man, but he was also a politician who had to think about the bigger picture. "Captain Sullivan," Martinez said after Jake had presented his evidence, "what you're showing me is deeply troubling, but we have to be careful about how we respond." "Careful?" Jake could not keep the anger out of his voice. "Admiral, they're planning to attack human colonies. Our students are being beaten and tortured. How much more careful can we afford to be?" Martinez sighed. "Jake, I understand your frustration, but humanity's position in galactic politics is precarious. We can't afford to be seen as the aggressors. If we attack the Academy, every species in the galaxy will unite against us." "So we do nothing?" Jake asked. "We just let them plan our destruction while our kids suffer?" "We lodge formal diplomatic protests. We work through proper channels. Jake cut the transmission. He had heard enough. Earth Command was going to let politics and diplomacy tie their hands while humans died. But Jake Sullivan was not a diplomat. He was a ship captain and he had a job to do. "Tony, Lisa," Jake called to his crew. "I need to show you something. What I'm about to tell you stays between us. Understood?" Both crew members nodded. Jake led them to a sealed section of the ship that they had never seen before. He placed his hand on a biometric scanner, and heavy blast doors slid open. Inside was a weapons control center that looked like something from a military battleship. Advanced targeting systems lined the walls. Weapon status displays showed the power levels of systems that should not exist on a cargo transport. "Holy hell," Lisa whispered. "Jake, what is this ship really?" Jake's expression was grim. "The New Dawn is a prototype warship disguised as a cargo hauler. We've been testing new weapon systems in secret for 5 years. Earth Command wanted a ship that could operate behind enemy lines without being detected." Tony stared at the weapon. Displays in amazement. "These power readings. Captain, some of these weapons are beyond anything I've ever seen. What exactly are we carrying?" Jake moved to the main weapons console. "Plasma cannons that can punch through station shields. Quantum torpedoes capable of destabilizing large structures. And this." He indicated a separate control panel with warning symbols all over it. This is a prototype matter disruptor. It can selectively target organic compounds while leaving inorganic materials undamaged. Lisa's eyes widened. You mean it can kill living beings while leaving their surroundings intact? That's exactly what I mean, Jake replied. The weapon was designed for hostage rescue situations. It can eliminate threats while preserving infrastructure and innocent bystanders. Tony looked at the captain with new understanding. You're thinking about attacking the academy. Jake nodded slowly. Earth Command won't act. The aliens think we're primitive and helpless. Our students are being tortured while their tormentors plan genocide against our species. Someone has to make a stand. It would be a suicide mission, Lisa pointed out. Even if we succeed, we'd be fugitives for the rest of our lives. Maybe, Jake agreed. But those kids in there are counting on someone to help them. And if we don't act, the academy will become a staging ground for attacks against human worlds. Tony activated his engineering console. The weapon systems have been dormant for months. It'll take me several hours to bring them fully online. We'll need approach vectors that avoid their sensor networks, Lisa added, already working at her navigation station. The academy has minimal defenses, but they'll have early warning systems. Jake felt a weight settling on his shoulders. He was about to commit an act that would change everything. But as he thought about Ben Davis lying beaten and bloody in the Academy Medical Center, and Amy Carter trying to protect her fellow students from daily harassment, he knew he had no choice. Begin preparations, Jake ordered. We're going to show those aliens what happens when you threaten humans. The ship's AI system activated, its synthetic voice filling the weapons control center. Captain, I am detecting increased energy signatures from the Academy. They appear to be jamming long-range communications. They're trying to isolate the human students completely, Jake realized. No outside contact, no witnesses to what they're planning. Tony looked up from his console. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildups in the Academy's industrial sections. They're manufacturing something big. Jake studied the sensor readings. Weapons. They're building weapons inside a neutral education facility. The evidence was overwhelming. The Academy had become a military base disguised as a school. The alien species were using it to plan humanity's destruction while torturing human students for entertainment. Jake made his decision. Set course for the Academy. Maximum stealth configuration. Jake, Lisa said quietly. Once we do this, there's no going back. Jake looked at his crew, these people who had become his family over years of secret missions. I know, but sometimes, doing the right thing means accepting the consequences. As the new dawn changed course toward the Academy of Worlds, Jake began composing a message that would be broadcast on all frequencies when they arrived. The aliens had mocked humanity's ban from their precious academy. Soon they would learn that keeping humans away had been the only thing protecting them. The dangerous ship and her crew were coming, and the galaxy was about to discover that humans were far from primitive when someone threatened their own. The new dawn approached the Academy of Worlds like a ghost in the darkness. Captain Jake Sullivan had disabled all external lights and running on minimal power. To any observer, the ship would look like another piece of space debris drifting between the stars. But inside the ship, every weapon system was charged and ready for war. Tony Rodriguez monitored his engineering displays with nervous excitement. All weapon systems are online, Captain. Plasma cannons at full charge, quantum, torpedoes loaded and armed. The matter disruptor is calibrated and ready. Lisa Park studied her navigation screens. I found 3 blind spots in their sensor network. We can approach from any of these vectors without being detected until we're within strike range. Jake nodded and opened communication channels to broadcast on all frequencies. His voice was calm and steady, but there was steel underneath it. This is Captain Jake Sullivan of the human vessel New Dawn. You have 48 hours to release all human students unharmed and formally apologize for violations of galactic education treaties. Failure to comply will result in immediate military action. Inside the academy, the message caused chaos. Administrator Zexari rushed to the main communication center, his crystalline form clicking against the metal floors as he moved. Impossible, Zexhari said to his staff. How did a human vessel penetrate our security perimeter? In the student dormitories, Sector gathered his Kethvar followers around a communication terminal. The big reptilian scales had turned bright red with anger and excitement. One primitive human ship threatens the Academy of Worlds, Sector hissed into the communication system. We shall add your wreckage to our trophy collection, human fool. Buzzik and his Zephyrian companions clicked their mandibles with amusement. Perhaps we should record the destruction of their ship. The other human students would enjoy watching their rescuers die. But Amy Carter and the other human students heard Jake's message with hope for the first time in months. Amy pressed her face against the small window in her dormitory room, looking out into space for any sign of the ship that had come to help them. He actually came, Ben Davis whispered from his bed in the medical center. His injuries were still healing, but his spirit was stronger than it had been in weeks. Captain Sullivan really came for us. Administrator Zexhari tried to contact the Kethvar and Zephyrian military fleets, but New Dawn's jamming systems blocked all long-range communications. The Academy was completely isolated from outside help. Sir, one of the Academy's communication officers reported, we cannot reach any of our allied fleets. The human ship is jamming all frequencies beyond the local system. Zexhari's crystal structure flickered with stress patterns. How is that possible? Human technology is primitive, compared to ours. For 48 hours, the Academy leadership tried everything they could think of. They sent negotiators who demanded that Jake surrender himself for judgment. They threatened to execute the human students if he did not withdraw immediately. They even tried to launch the Academy's small defense shuttles to attack New Dawn directly. All of their efforts failed. The negotiators were ignored. The threats were met with silence, and the defense shuttles were destroyed by precise plasma cannon fire before they could get within weapon range of the human ship. Jake gave them exactly 48 hours. When the deadline passed without any sign of compliance, he turned to his crew with grim determination. Begin elimination protocol, Jake ordered. Tony's hands moved across his weapon controls, targeting the Academy's power grid and life support systems. Quantum torpedoes ready. Fire, Jake commanded. The quantum torpedoes struck the Academy with surgical precision. They disabled the main power generators and severed life support connections to specific sections of the massive station. But the targeting was selective. Only areas housing the alien students who had led the harassment campaign lost power and atmosphere. Sector found himself trapped in a dormitory section as the lights went out and warning alarms began screaming. The air recycling system shut down and emergency bulkheads sealed the corridors. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the cold vacuum of space waiting just outside. Help us, Sector transmitted on emergency frequencies. The humans are trying to kill us, but Jake's response came back immediately. You celebrated the mock genocide of human families. You beat a human student nearly to death for trying to call his father. You planned military strikes against human colonies. Now you face the consequences of your actions. Buzzik and his Zephyrian followers were trapped in another section of the Academy. Their mandibles clicked frantically as they tried to break through sealed doors. The atmosphere in their section was venting slowly into space through controlled breaches that Tony had created with precise weapon fire. We were just students, Buzzik transmitted desperately. We meant no real harm. Tell that to Ben Davis, Jake replied coldly. Tell that to Amy Carter and the other humans you tormented for months. The matter disruptor was the final weapon Jake used. The exotic energy beam passed through the Academy's hull without damaging it, but every organic being it touched simply ceased to exist. The weapon targeted only the alien students who had participated in the harassment campaign, leaving others unharmed. Sector's final transmission was a plea for mercy that would have made Amy Carter laugh if she had heard it. The same reptilian who had celebrated human genocide was now begging for his life. Please, Sector hissed into his communicator as the matter disruptor beam approached his section. We can negotiate. We can make amends. Too late, Jake replied. You made your choice when you decided humans were acceptable targets for your hatred. The elimination took exactly 17 minutes from start to finish. When it ended, 43 alien students were dead, including every student who had tormented the humans. The Academy's infrastructure was damaged but repairable. Most importantly, all 12 human students were alive and unharmed. Jake docked New Dawn with the Academy and personally led the evacuation of the human students. Amy Carter was the first to board his ship, tears streaming down her face. "Captain Sullivan," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "you came back for us." "I told you we'd take care of you," Jake replied gently. "Humans don't abandon their own." Ben Davis limped aboard the ship with help from Tony Rodriguez. His injuries were healing, but he would carry scars from his beating for the rest of his life. "What happens now, Captain?" Jake looked out at the damaged Academy through the ship's view screen. "Now we disappear. My crew and I are fugitives now, but you students will be returned safely to Earth." As New Dawn prepared to depart, Jake opened one final communication channel to the Academy. His message was broadcast to every surviving alien, student and faculty member. "This is Captain Jake Sullivan. Let this be a lesson to the galaxy. Humanity remembers its friends and its enemies. We are not the primitive species you believed us to be. We are not helpless victims you can torment for your amusement. We are humans and we protect our own." New Dawn vanished into the darkness between stars, carrying the rescued human students toward safety. Behind them, the Academy of Worlds was left to count its dead and consider what they had learned about humanity. The message was clear: mock humans at your own risk. Threaten humans and face the consequences. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for the last time. In the years that followed, when alien diplomats tried to threaten human interests, they were reminded of the Academy incident. The phrase "remember the Academy" became humanity's warning to those who would do them harm. And somewhere in the deep space between the stars, Captain Jake Sullivan and his crew continued their patrol, watching over humanity's interests and ensuring that the lesson of the Academy of Worlds was never forgotten.